What's up, PlayStation Nation? Can you see how excited I am? Can you hear the giddy excitement in my voice? Look at this. So Arcade1Up, tastemakers, they hooked us up here big time so that we could give you a nice preview of the arcade cabinets that are coming out in just a few short weeks. We already have Asteroids, Centipede, and Rampage set up. I am going to build for you the Street Fighter Champion Edition, Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition cabinet today on this video. Give you an idea of what's in the box, how it's all set up, how to put it together. Little tough areas I found when putting together the Rampage cabinet. The other two came pre-assembled. I got this one, put it together, and I'm going to work on this one video for you guys now. If you haven't heard already, go listen to episode 592 of the podcast, where I give kind of brief, not so brief, but kind of a brief preview of all the different cabinets and what's happening with them. I'll be going more in depth in a couple more videos and on the podcast and on the website because initial impressions, they're fantastic. Better than I could have imagined. And I absolutely love them so far. So this cabinet, the Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition cabinet, because that is the marquee title here. Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition was released in March 1992. This also comes with Street Fighter 2 The New Challengers, which is from September 93, and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, which is from February 1994. So you have three very different Street Fighter games on here, all arcade games. Now this cabinet does only have 3 games compared to the others here that have 4 games, and they all retail for $2.99. So really for this one it's $100 a game for an arcade authentic experience. Just slightly smaller than the real cabinet, but everything is there in terms of the artwork on the cabinet itself and the marquee and the controls. I mean, these are real arcade joysticks and buttons. When I get into it, you're not going to believe it. They're fantastic. So let me open up the box and we'll dig into this and get it going. See how quick it is to build. It's actually really pretty easy. So let's go in.
Okay, so you can see that the box that the cabinets come in, really nicely designed. It's got a horizontal graphic on the one side, vertical on the other side, to help retailers, obviously. Very clearly marked how many games are inside right there. You can see this one includes 3 games. The side of the box even says the same thing, tells you which games are included. And one of the other nice features is that the handles are reinforced here with plastic on either side. So you're not going to rip right through that cardboard. So what you're going to need, all you're going to need, the only tools are a Phillips head screwdriver and a box cutter or some kind of knife. I had already cut this open, so kind of a cheat there. But you're going to cut open the 2 pieces there and open up the box, and what you have inside, as you can see, there are several boxes and some styrofoam. It's all actually really nicely packed, keeps everything very safe, very secure, and you don't have to worry about anything getting damaged in shipping. Because it's all pretty solid, and inside those individual boxes there's a lot of styrofoam as well. So you've got your generic instructions and a very specific owner's manual specific to the cabinet, and I'll go through those a little later. The first thing you want to do is literally pull out every single thing in here and open up every single box. That box right there with the little fragile mark on it, that's the one that has the LCD screen. And when I built the first cabinet, the Rampage cabinet, I really didn't think I would need that until late in the process. So I didn't open up that box. And maybe 3 pages into the instructions, I needed that box. So you really need to have everything open and ready to go. It'll just make everything a lot easier. The sides of the cabinet here, they're individually wrapped and they're bundled together there with a piece of cardboard around them and a strap to hold them in place. They will slide out of there though, so be careful taking them out of the big box itself, because if you pull that at an angle or you don't really get it, it's going to slide one way or the other right out the end. You don't want to damage those. They're not super well protected, but they're protected from getting scratches and scuffs and everything with that plastic on them. So as you can see, the different artwork, really specific to the cabinet itself, is on the side. This is what it looked like in the arcade, and I'll show you on the other ones, on the other videos I do for the other machines. You'll get to see the artwork on the side of those. It's literally the artwork that was in the arcade, and I actually have comparison pictures with actual arcade machines to show you. I went to an arcade nearby and took a bunch of pictures and actually got some video, and found a really interesting comparison for Rampage especially, and why it's better to have one of these cabinets than one of the originals. But you can check that out when that video goes up. So inside each of these boxes, you can see all your pieces are really well protected with styrofoam. That is actually all of your screws and dowels and parts for the joystick, for the control deck. This first box, it has the Arcade1Up logo and information, and that's on the back, on the top of the machine. Everything is wrapped together in this cellophane. You can take it apart, or you can carefully cut it apart, whichever you want to do. The labels on them, everything is labeled alphabetically, so it's just like an IKEA piece of furniture. If you've ever built anything from IKEA, you're going to know exactly what you're doing here. It's very, very straightforward, very simple, very easy to do. You can see pieces like this. Some of the pieces are very, very thin, and that's what helps keep the weight down, actually. And they're not like critical pieces. I would say they're not really critical pieces. The pieces on the front, you can see on those other cabinets, the asteroid centipede and all that, that is a very thin piece of wood. So you kind of have to be careful if kids are down there and they're kicking around, or even your friends might be frustrated and they kick forward, or they can break that. So that's one piece that's a little thin that you might want to be careful with. That right there is the marquee. Each machine has its own marquee title, and that is the top title, and that's the one that gets the marquee on the top, and the control deck is designed after that specific game. For this one, it was Street Fighter II Champion Edition, and that's basically what this cabinet is. So that's one box, just a couple of pieces you have there. The next box, when you cut that open, it's just a couple more pieces. Same thing. Everything's wrapped up. This is kind of cool. This comes with each of the machines, at least each of the two that I built myself that have the joysticks. You get extra balls to put on the top of the joystick, just in case you lose them, or I don't know, they don't fit. I actually had a slight problem fitting one of them on the third stick on the Rampage machine. It would not screw on no matter what I did, and I grabbed another one, and that one wouldn't screw on, and I took one off that I had already put on before and moved it over, and was tight, but it went on. I don't know if it was something with the machining with the screws or what. This is the control deck. This is how they come. It's all self-contained. It's one unit, and you plug the ribbon cable right into that spot right there. You've got the audio there. The audio comes out in the upper right-hand corner, and there's a little A sticker on each of these control decks. That's a very specific button that you're going to need to know. I took it off. It's clear. It's see-through. It just kind of gets in the way. But you need to know when you start what that A button is, because that's actually how you choose which game you want from the menu. Once you know what it is, you just know what it is, and you don't really need that sticker. It's just something there to get you started, basically. So in this last box, this is the one you have to be a little more careful with. Not too careful, but a little more careful with, because this actually contains the LCD screen. And you'll see, when I pulled it out, I ripped it right through the styrofoam on the one side. The other styrofoam you just take off. And this is also cellophane wrapped. This has the front of the cabinet, the base of it there, where it lists the titles that are on this machine. That's a really thin piece of wood. And this is a little thicker. It's a little more significant. And then you've got the LCD screen, which is both wrapped individually and also has a layer of plastic on top of it, a thin film of plastic on top of it to keep it from getting scratched. So even when you take that cellophane off, there's still something there protecting it until you physically take that piece off as well. Now the artwork on these, it's basically the logos for each of the machines, but the colors are vivid and bright, and it's really beautiful, really glossy, and it really just captures that nostalgia the moment you see these logos for games that you've played your entire life. It's really exciting. Thinking that once I get this thing built, I'm going to be playing these games in my house, So go into the instructions here, and what you've got, like I said before, the owner's manual down there. You've got some generic instructions and a warranty card, basic warranty card right there, standard. And I'll show you some of the inside of the owner's manual right here. What you can see is, it has the game itself on the front, the Street Fighter II. It's got all the standard warnings and everything, and safety instructions, installation, stuff like that. But it also has the game controls listed. Now, these are also listed on the screen when you're going from the menu into the game itself every time. But it's also here in a game manual if you need it. Now on the back, they show Series 1, the games we know of, and be on the lookout for Pac-Man, Galaga, and Space Invaders. Space Invaders, dude. Oh my gosh. And Pac-Man, of course. So we knew Galaga's out there right now as an exclusive to one of the retailers. But Pac-Man and Space Invaders are coming soon. So exciting. All right. So just like any IKEA setup, this is all very basic, very straightforward. You just match up what you need. You've got all your different parts. And the nice thing is, with all the parts, there's a separate bag that has extra pieces, several extra screws, extra dowels, a whole bunch of different things. And like I said before, you get another set of balls essentially for the top of the joystick, and the plastic piece that covers down at the bottom of the joystick. So you've got extras if you ever need them, which is kind of nice to have. You want to obviously take out all the screws, and actually not take them out of the bags, because then you'll lose what the letters are, what the different screws are and dowels, because there are a couple different size screws, and they're obviously very specific to different parts of the machine. But it's good to just keep them organized and know what you're doing here as you set that up. There's not a whole lot here. There's also included in the bag there and basically a wall retaining wall anchor kit, so that you can hook the machine up and basically anchor it to the wall so that it won't tip over. That's become a standard thing for TVs and things of that nature, because kids apparently tend to climb on them or grab at them, and they fall on them and seriously injure or kill them. So if you have small kids and they can be a little unruly at times, or you're not sure whether they're safe around this, it's a good thing to do. You can anchor it right into the wall. You can see in the instructions down there on the floor, there are multiple holes in this, and you need to know which ones the dowels go in. It's very clear in the instructions where you're going to put these. It's IKEA furniture, essentially. It's very straightforward, very easy to get through. So with the different cabinets, some of the cabinets come... the Asteroids machine really doesn't have any joysticks or anything to deal with, so that control deck is basically pre-built. It's done when you get it. There's nothing else to do with it. The Centipede one is essentially the same, since that only has a trackball and some buttons. There's not much going on there that you need to worry about. The control deck is all one piece, and it's very simple and straightforward, and you just plug that one in and go. So you're going to need some room here. I didn't give myself a whole lot of room because I was trying to record this, and I was trying to get the camera back far enough and high enough to really give you a good look at these things. I did move it around a couple times in the video, you'll see. But you're going to need to immediately, after getting the dowels in that first piece, you're going to immediately need to get one of the side parts of the cabinet, and you need to know which side you're gonna be using here. You're gonna lay that down and start to put things into it, because all these pieces are going to go in directly into the side here, and you'll see as we go. Again, very easy process. You're just gonna slide those two dowels in where they go, get some screws, screw it in tight, and move on to the next piece. So to give you an idea of what's really in the box, all told, there's only about 20 dowels. There's exactly 20 dowels. What am I saying about? There's 36 screws of 4 different sizes, 36 total across 4 different sizes, and 4 brackets that are actually used. The brackets are actually used to attach the monitor to the cabinet itself. That's it in terms of screws and everything. You've also got the power cord, obviously the cable that plugs into the back of the monitor, and then the piece that plugs into the wall. And then as far as cabinet parts, it's a total of 13 parts. So it's 13 pieces to put this entire cabinet together. The time involved really is in lining things up and getting all the screws in and making sure everything is correct as you go. You're going to be doing a lot of moving things around, unless you've got a lot of space. You'll be doing a lot of moving things around and getting things lined up and putting dowels in. That always takes time. But otherwise, it's a very simple process. This whole thing, this video is about 50 minutes or so, but the actual process, if I wasn't stopping and moving the camera around and doing all that stuff, 30, 40 minutes max, maybe. And that's just taking your time and being careful with it. Otherwise, it's really... it's pretty quick. So these cabinets, this is how they're going to come. They'll come flat packed in those boxes, and depending on which unit you have, you're going to have 3 games, 4 games, whatever. You're going to have a control deck that you need to screw parts onto, or you're going to have a completely self-contained control deck that you don't even need to do anything with. So, the complexity of the build is not anything that you're going to need to worry about in any way. So these pieces here, as you can see, there's 3 different pieces all coming at one point. Now, one of them, which I'll get to in a minute, one of them, the white one, there's a piece in the instructions which is telling you very specifically that you need to put it facing a certain way within the cabinet itself. Something has changed, obviously, between when the instructions were made and when the parts were machined, because the holes are not exactly the same as they show in the instructions, and it's really not something you need to worry about at all. What those holes are for, that it's asking you to line up very specifically, those holes are for the wall anchor piece, and you don't need to keep them up or down. Those 2 holes are actually centered directly in board L there, and I'll give you a close-up of it coming up here. But in the instructions, it took me a minute to figure that out, because I'm looking at the instructions and it's showing you, and it very specifically calls it out and says, note 2 holes should be as shown, because those 2 holes in the instructions are more towards the top, more towards one side of the board itself. And it's right here. You can see where it says the 2 holes should be as shown, and you can see them up at the top of the board. And it wants you to put the board in exactly like that, with those at the top of the board. And when you look at the actual board itself, they're centered directly in the board. So that kind of threw me off the first time I saw it, and I didn't quite understand what was going on. Maybe I had the wrong board. I didn't know what the deal was. That's just the points where you'd screw in the anchor hardware to anchor it to the wall, and it's not going to matter. You're not going to need it to be, top or bottom or whatever. The way it's built now, it's built so that it goes right into the middle of that board. I think it's more stable that way as well. So obviously, when you're putting all these pieces in, you want to make sure that wherever the label is, wherever that letter label is on the boards, that's facing the inside of the cabinet. So it's nothing you would see once the cabinet is built. It'll all be on the interior. And once we've got all those pieces done, now we've got to make some room, because we're going to have to put together the brackets on the monitor itself. And, even with all the cellophane and with everything on there, I was still, a little paranoid, a little concerned, and I laid out a little towel there to actually put the brackets on. You need to take this cellophane off. And like I said, you still have another plastic piece, thin plastic cellophane wrap right over top of the monitor itself, where that sticker is. It's attached to that sticker. So you don't really have to worry about that getting your monitor scratched, because everything is still protected at this point. I'm just a little paranoid laying that flat on the ground, and you can see right there, I'm peeling part of it off, so you can see that there's actually something covering that right now. You will peel that off when it's time to play, obviously, when you get closer to the end of the build. But you keep that on here, make sure it doesn't get scratched up, and just for extra protection, I laid it on top of a towel. So this part's a little bit tricky. One of the things I found that made it easier is putting the screws into the brackets first and then lining it up right there that way. Because if you put the brackets down and try to line up the screws after the fact, it just becomes a little more difficult. So you'll see, I I did it both ways here. I started to do it, and then I remembered that I had a problem with this with the last build, and it's actually sometimes easier to just lift the whole thing up and put the screws in and line it up and screw them in, and you're all good. Makes it a lot easier because you're going to do this 4 times. And one of the highlights on there is that you are not supposed to over tighten the screws. Essentially just screw them in until they're flat in there. Don't have to be too tight. They're tight enough in there that the bracket is going to hold it and it's all good. You don't want to go too tight and crack the back of that screen while you're screwing all this in. So if you see right there by where the ribbon cable attaches to the monitor, just to the right, there is a small opening. That is where the power cable goes in. And that is what you're going to need to know when you go to plug that power cable in, because the first time I did it, I was reaching, you'll see when you get to the end of this, that everything is inside the cabinet and you're coming into the back of the cabinet and it's dark in there, and I didn't have a light with me, and I'm reaching around, I'm feeling all over the place trying to figure out where is this hole for this power cable. And I eventually went back to the instructions and saw where it is right there on the bottom, right by the edge of the ribbon cable, and it's obvious at that point. But I just didn't know where I was going with it in the dark, essentially. Okay, so I know the video seems to be dragging on a bit. I could see that myself. But the idea here is to give you kind of a real-time-ish look at what it actually takes to build this thing. I know I could speed it up. I'm not going to. If you want, you can fast forward a bit. I'm going to try to give you a little information here and there as it goes. But I didn't want to just skim through it and say, oh, look, 5 minutes, it's done, because it takes more than 5 minutes. And that's kind of the key to the whole thing, is the amount of time involved, which, again, is not that long, 30, 40 minutes at most. But I wanted you to see really what it takes with all the different pieces that need to be screwed in and all the dowels that need to go in and how things fit together. And you'll see things, there are some tricky parts, minor tricky parts, nothing that is too difficult, nothing that is problematic really. Just little things you need to be aware of that I'm glad I went through and saw, especially doing 2 cabinets back to back. I was able to see even where I thought I had everything down after the first one and came into the second one here and ran into a minor problem here and there. So this, it's a little nerve-wracking. You've got your LCD monitor kind of there. It has a nice groove to fit into, which is good. But then you also need to line up those holes that the brackets are going to be directly above. And I wasn't quite getting it. I had to slightly adjust things here and there, and then put the screws in and actually get this screwed in. So depending on how tight you make those screws, and there's a little leeway in the brackets for where the screws can actually fit in. So there's a little bit of movement depending on where you actually tighten the screws. So it might not line up perfectly the first time, and you're going to need to adjust things just a little bit to kind of get it to all line up and get in there. having a second person to hold it here, it might be helpful, but I was able to do it just fine on my own. Having a smaller screwdriver would probably help a bit, because as you can see, I'm right up against that, and I'm right up against the kind of the power supply and where the ribbon cable goes in to the back of the LCD there, especially when I try to do that one bracket. And you'll see that comes into play later when the cabinet is put together and I'm inside in the back of it, with it stood up in kind of a darker area, and trying to reach in there and get those last two brackets that are on the top right now, get those screwed into the other side panel. So a smaller screwdriver would certainly help. I do have a smaller one. I didn't feel like looking for it, honestly, and this one worked out well enough. Wasn't that much of a problem. It actually worked out fine. So once you get these screws in, then things get really exciting. I know. It's gripping tail here through this boring video, but at this point you're inserting the dowels there into the marquee there on the right side of the screen, and that's it. That is the marquee, the beautiful top of the cabinet with the game's logo and everything on it, just like it was in the arcade. And that's what's going on this top piece here, and you'll see where it goes in. It's pretty interesting how it fits, but it's very easy to get it put together. For starting here, all you're doing is putting the dowels in. You're going to screw in the other side later, but you just need to kind of stand it in here. And when it's all said and done, there is the marquee on top of the cabinet, and you can see the attention to detail there, so that it looks exactly like the one that was in the arcades. Now, one thing that I thought of after the fact is that you should probably peel back some of that cellophane that's on top of the monitor. It shouldn't really interfere with it, but with one of the pre-made cabinets, actually both the pre-made cabinets I had, the cellophane was still on the monitor, and with the placement of the marquee, the cellophane was kind of behind the marquee. So I had to undo a couple of screws and open things up a bit to peel off that cellophane. Otherwise, when I ripped it, I had little pieces of it that were wedged underneath that marquee, and it just didn't look good. So I had to take that apart and get that stuff off. So if you just peel it back a little here and give yourself some space so that it doesn't get kind of caught underneath the marquee as you screw these two pieces in, these two screws in, which will hold the marquee right to the monitor itself. Now, it may not look like this is solid enough, but once you get all these pieces together, it's actually a really, really solid build, and it doesn't feel like anything is going to come apart, or it doesn't feel flimsy. The only areas that you need to be a little concerned about, and I'll show you the front piece where the actual logos for the games are, that's a bit flimsy in terms of the width of the board and everything. And that's an area of concern if you have violent friends or violent kids, or you yourself happen to be violent, especially if you're losing a game and you get frustrated. So that's one area to be concerned with. Now, this is what goes up in the back and the top. It's the Arcade1Up logo. It slides right in and slides into the groove there, and it becomes one nice solid piece up the top. And now comes probably one of the trickier parts. This is a good place to have a second person help you if you need it. because as you can see, there's a bunch of dowels sticking up there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, at least 12 that I count. And you need to line the other side of the cabinet up with all of them. That gets tricky. That gets a little bit difficult because you're underneath and you're trying to slide, and you get one side in and you feel like it's down, and then you come around the other side and then it pops up and you have to go back to the other side and get it down, and there's a lot of different pieces in there that all need to line up exactly. And once you get them in, you can start putting screws in, and maybe that's an even better idea. Once you get one of them in, put a screw, just start the screw. Don't obviously tighten it yet, but put a screw in to hold that one little area in place, and then start to get these other pieces in. Because as you can see, I kind of moved my way around the entire cabinet, tightening things down and pushing them down until I got it all in place. It's not incredibly difficult. It's just more difficult alone when you're trying to get this thing together and get it all lined up. Then you have the rest of these screws on the side to tighten everything up. And we're getting close to the end here, believe it or not. There's not a whole lot more left to do once you get these screws in. You've got obviously the control deck coming up, connecting the ribbon cable there. You've got the power going in. You have a couple more screws on the other side, since when you put some of these pieces in, it was laying flat and you couldn't get to them. And then you have the back of the cabinet, and that's basically it. It's actually not going to take long. Once you get to this point, you're really in the home stretch, and you can start to see the whole thing come together at this point. And it gets a little more exciting. Not that it wasn't exciting to begin with. I mean, you're building your very own arcade cabinet to play these games in your house, which every time I say it, I just I can't believe that it's actually happening. It's remarkable for a kid of the 70s who saw arcade games right from when they came out, right from when they came into existence. And just the idea that you could have one of these in your house is mind-boggling. It's bonkers. It's just completely crazy. So, once all these screws are in and everything's tightened up, we're then done at that point with the cabinet on its side. And then I will go ahead and lift up the cabinet carefully. You have to be careful with where you're grabbing it and what you're holding, and lift it up and stand it up. And then from here, we start to go, well, we have a couple screws on the outside, and then we start to go to the inside of the cabinet as well. And here I just put a flashlight on the bottom of the cabinet and shined it straight up so that I could see what I was doing. These screws are a little trickier, just because of the placement and because of, like I said, the way these brackets are built, and that things can be shifted just a little bit in one direction or another, and you might need to adjust a little bit and just push things a little bit to get them to exactly line up. It also helps here to have a smaller screwdriver, so that you're not reaching with this really long one and trying to get these screws into the brackets here. And especially when you get up top and you've got that little box on the back of the LCD that's kind of in your way. So just something to keep in mind. Having a good light source or having, light shining into the back would help too, because it is kind of dark in there, and it's hard to see where things are lining up and what you're actually doing there. So it can be hard to get those screws right where they need to be. But once you get it lined up, again, just like everything else, it's pretty easy. Just don't want to over tighten it. It's all very solid in there. You've got 8 screws really holding that monitor in place. so it's all good. You can see I had a little bit of trouble with the top screws, just because of the positioning and the screwdriver I was using. But again, get the right tools and line everything up, and it's pretty easy to do. So once you get this done, now you're just down to the control deck, attaching the knobs on top of the joysticks, and you're just about there. So again, we're getting real close to the end here, and there's not a whole lot left to do. And I know at this point in your build, you're probably getting really, really excited to just get it done and get playing. But take your time and make sure that you get these parts right so that you don't have any problems later on. Make sure that when you go to attach that ribbon cable, everything is secure so that you don't have to open it up again after the fact, and make sure it's all tight in there. You can see I was having trouble with this last screw, and it was just the alignment of it. I couldn't quite get right, and having that longer screwdriver wasn't helping. And a smarter person would have gone and found the smaller screwdriver, made it easier on themselves, and actually been able to screw this in a lot quicker and easier, and not made it such a problem. But I'm not a smarter person, and I did eventually get it done. So once all of that's done, which is coming up right now, we're going to move on, I believe, right into the control deck. And let's take a look at that. Okay, so from the front, you still have a couple more screws on the outside. Forgot about those. I mentioned those earlier and forgot about those when we were getting closer. I'm getting excited. So that's the side of the cabinet that was laying flat on the ground. You had already put some of the bottom pieces. You had already screwed some of those in. You just have to make sure you screw in the marquee there, get that all lined up. And then once that's all done and everything is all tight and everything looks all good, you're going to take this. Now this is a very thin piece of wood, essentially. This one slides in. It's got grooves to slide into, and it's kind of notched at the bottom there, so it's a little tricky getting it in when you start it. But once it goes in, it just slides right down to the bottom, and that's it. That is the front of the machine. So that's where you just have to be careful. You don't want to really hit that because you can break that pretty easily. This is also a very thin piece, and this is the angled piece right below the control deck, and that slides into an angled groove right here and makes it look really solid, even though it's very thin there. So that's just something to keep, just to be aware of. Now, before I put the control deck in, I peeled off all of the rest of the cover here. And some of it is wrapped around some screws. There are some screws holding on the little faceplate over top of the monitor, which has the graphics that were around the arcade machine's monitor. But you just want to make sure you get all that off before you get this control deck on, because it'll be caught behind the control deck and it'll really get stuck in there. So the first thing you want to do is attach the cable. There's a little notch on it. You just line up that notch, just like any ribbon cable, slide it right in, make sure it's in there secure, that's tight, and that's it. That's connected. You're all done. Now on this side, if you have a Street Fighter cabinet or you have the Rampage cabinet or anything with actual joysticks, you're going to need to get the knobs and attach those onto the top, the little balls, as I was calling them earlier. And what you want to do, the first thing you need to put those little overlays there that'll cover up, the bottom of it. And one part is flat. I'll show you here. One part is flat. The other part has like a little notch in it, and you want to put that flat part, that looks all textured, that's facing up. And then you just take the two knobs and you screw them on. Now, like I said, with Rampage, with the third joystick on the Rampage machine, I could not get that ball to screw on to save my life. It would not work. And I tried it several different times. I got a second one and was having trouble with that one. And I eventually took one off of one of the other sticks and moved it over and got that one on. I pulled out one of the extra knobs because you get several of them. You get extras for each of them. And I ended up putting that on the one I had taken from. So they do all go on eventually. There was just something slightly off with the machining, either in the knob itself or in the post with the threading at the top. And it just did not want to go on there. Not past like one turn or a half a turn. It wouldn't even go any further. It was crazy. So from here, you have 4 screws to go in, each corner basically. And once you get those screws in, all you have is the back of the machine and you're done. I mean, this is when the excitement builds, This is when you're ready to just get it done and get that machine turned on and go. And just get it right. You'll see I hit that point. I hit that point with the back of the machine. I know this is the end of it, and I got really excited, and I could not, for the life of me, line up the back piece that slides into the machine. And it's because I didn't quite have it situated in the groove right at the very bottom of the machine. And because I didn't, I could not line up the 2 little holes at the top for the screws at all. And at first I thought, what happened here was this something bad with the manufacturing? It wasn't at all. It was something bad with the builder that just was not paying attention to what he was doing and was not making sure that everything was actually lined up correctly when the back piece was slid in. So here's the cables that you need to plug in. This is where on the Rampage machine I could not figure out where that hole was, and I had to go back and look through the instructions. But here I already know where it is, and it's right in the corner there of the little box on the back of the LCD. You will need to undo the cable tie. You could probably tie up like one little bit of it, but you don't need to. It's the only thing hanging inside the machine. The machine itself is pretty empty inside, as you can see. So you just lay that right down to the back. There's like a white piece there as well, which is kind of a cord catcher. It'll hold the thing in place if you pop it through that little hole at the bottom. I didn't do it on this video. I did it after the fact. I just kind of pushed that piece through. The thing is, if you don't push the white piece all the way through, which is kind of hard to do, it's built to be really, really tight. If you don't push that piece all the way through and you unplug that, the cord could drop back into the machine, and then you're going to have to unscrew these screws at the top to actually get that cord out again and get this thing plugged in again. So you might want to take the time to actually do that. Like I said, after the fact, after this video was done, I unscrewed those 2 pieces at the top and went back inside and pulled that white piece and popped it through the hole so that it was out and holding everything in place. Now, these were the screws I had problems with, and I could not figure out why nothing was aligning. I was shining a light to try to figure out where's the hole. I don't see the hole. And I looked down. I thought everything was good down there. I kept moving it around. I couldn't figure out what was going on here at all, why things weren't quite lining up. And it took me a minute to figure out it was the bottom. I did not have things lined up correctly at the bottom, and because of that, it was all slightly off. Off just enough that there was no way to get those screws in. The holes were nowhere near where the screws were trying to go in. So once I got that all figured out, and I'm leaving all this in here just to show what a dummy I am, just so you know, when it comes time and you get to this point, make sure if you can see down at the bottom right corner there, it's out. It's not even in the groove down there. So it keeps popping out at the bottom, and I should have realized that immediately, that that's where my problem was. Well, I eventually got all that figured out. And if you want to take the time, you can see the 2 screw holes in the middle up at the top. Those are the ones that line up for the piece that will anchor it to the wall if you want to do that. And if you have small kids, that might be something you want to take care of just in case, because they could be reaching up for the cabinet if they're too small, or grabbing at it, and the whole thing could potentially topple over. I mean, I know it's more for legal reasons. I don't think it would be that easy for it to topple over, but it could happen. So all that's left here really is plugging in and turning on. You will see the splash screen that comes up on every single one of these, and then the menu screen, and I will start a game but fade out immediately so that you will come back and see a more in-depth look at each of these cabinets and the games that are on them. But for now, enjoy the fruits of our labor and see how it goes.